At a grand wedding rehearsal, the groom makes a cruel remark that stings the entire room. His arrogance fills the air, but the bride-to-be notices the unease it creates. In the shadows of the laughter, the stage is quietly being set for an unexpected turn. You think she even show up? Poor thing probably can't even afford a bus ticket. The groom, Richard, smirked as he tugged on the sleeve of his crisp designer suit, his voice dripping with arrogance. The chandelier light glimmered on the polished marble floor of the ballroom, throwing gold reflections on the walls lined with roses and crystal vases. The hall smelled of champagne and lilac, a perfect stage for the night he thought would be his triumph. Laughter erupted from a few guests at his table, their jeweled bracelets clinking as they lifted glasses of wine. "Oh, Richard, you're too much," one bridesmaid giggled. But beneath the surface, a ripple of discomfort moved through the room. The comment wasn't just a joke. It was a weapon. Richard leaned back, proud. She had her chance. She left me with nothing but embarrassment. Tonight, his grin widened. Tonight she'll see what she lost. The crowd murmured, some exchanging uneasy glances, others hiding smirks. A waiter passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, his eyes cast down, pretending not to hear. Yet every word hung heavy, echoing against the ornate walls. At the far end of the ballroom, Angela, the bride-to-be, adjusted the lace at her wrist. Her smile faltered, only slightly. She had heard stories about Richard's ex-wife Maria, but this was the first time she witnessed the venom in his tone. She forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Richard, maybe it's best not to talk about her here. This is our night." "Our night," Richard repeated, raising his glass. "Which is exactly why she needs to see what she lost. She'd come crawling in her little thrift store dress, and everyone here will know I traded up." The air tightened. Behind the orchestra warming up, a violin string squeaked off key, as if the music itself recoiled. A hush fell for a moment, then someone at the table whispered, "What if she doesn't show?" Richard scoffed. "Oh, she come? She won't resist. Curiosity always drags the desperate." He tilted his glass, watching the champagne bubbles rise. "And when she does, I'll make sure her humiliation is complete." The candles flickered as though in protest. For a brief moment, Angela caught her reflection in the mirror behind him, the shimmer of her gown, the gloss of her hair, and behind it, Richard's sharp smile that looked more like a blade than a grin. She swallowed the unease crawling up her throat. Guests whispered, leaning close to one another. Some were excited to witness the drama, others unsettled by the cruelty in his words. But none dared speak against him. Not yet. Richard slammed his glass down, signaling finality. "Tomorrow, when the doors open, she'll walk in. And when she does, everyone here will see just how far above her I've risen." The orchestra shifted to a soft, celebratory tune, trying to drown the bitterness. But the words lingered like smoke. From the balcony above, the night air drifted in cool and quiet. No one noticed the figure who stood outside in the shadows of the driveway, a letter clutched in hand, eyes glimmering with something more than sorrow. The laughter inside swelled again. But outside, engines purred in the distance deep. Smooth, commanding. Headlights cut through the dark, rolling closer. Tomorrow would not belong to Richard. The guests didn't know it yet, but someone was already on her way, and she wasn't coming quietly. "Smile wider, Richard. The cameras love you." The wedding photographer's voice bounced through the golden lobby of the Grand Marigold Hotel. Guests in gowns and tuxedos lined the marble steps, each holding crystal flutes, clinking glasses under chandeliers that sparkled like frozen fireworks. Richard straightened his tie, basking in the glow. He had handpicked this venue because it screamed wealth. The walls dripped with gold trim, the air filled with perfume, laughter, and the faint notes of a harp. To him, this wasn't just a wedding, it was proof of his success. Angela stood beside him, a vision in ivory silk. Her veil shimmered like soft mist under the lights, but her eyes carried the weight of unease. Every time Richard laughed too loud or cracked another cruel joke, a shadow deepened across her smile. She tried to ignore it, clutching her bouquet tighter. "Where is she?" Richard muttered to his groomsmen, scanning the entrance with restless eyes. I told you she won't miss this. Maria's too proud for that. The groomsman shifted uncomfortably. Maybe she didn't want to come, man. Richard sneered. Oh, she come? She wouldn't dare let me win without showing her face. Inside, the band struck up a jazzy tune as servers weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne and canapes. Guests exchanged whispers, already buzzing with curiosity about the mysterious ex-wife. I heard she lost everything after the divorce, one woman murmured. Richard so generous, even inviting her, another chimed in. Generous? A third whispered. Or cruel? The gossip spread like wildfire, feeding Richard's pride. He smirked, soaking in every word. Let them talk, he whispered under his breath. Tonight, she crawled back into the shadows where she belongs. Then it happened. The soft rumble started low, distant, almost blending with the band's bass line. But within seconds, it grew louder, smooth, deep, commanding. Not the sputter of an old engine, but the sleek growl of luxury. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Even the harpist's fingers faltered on the strings. Angela froze, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. She heard it, too. The doorman, standing tall in his red coat, straightened as headlights cut across the polished glass doors. Outside, gleaming silver curves reflected the sun. The car purred like a predator, confident and unhurried. Whispers shot through the hall like sparks. Is that? No, it can't be. Who would show up in that? The vehicle rolled to a smooth stop. A chauffeur in crisp black stepped out, his white gloves gleaming as he opened the rear door with a graceful bow. Silence fell inside the ballroom. The crowd leaned forward, breaths caught. Even Richard's smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat. From the doorway, the first stiletto heel touched the marble, followed by another. The red sole flashed like fire against the polished floor. A figure stepped out, composed, radiant, and untouched by time or circumstance. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Angela's lips parted in disbelief. Richard's jaw tightened. His hand, still clutching a champagne glass, trembled slightly, the bubbles inside quivering. The orchestra faltered again, as though the music itself knew the story had just changed. And then, before anyone could speak, 3 small shadows appeared behind her. Stepping out into the light, the ballroom froze. 3 little figures stepped onto the marble, floor children dressed immaculately in matching black and white attire, each holding the other's hand as if choreographed. Their shiny shoes clicked softly against the stone, echoing louder than the orchestra that had fallen silent. Gasps erupted like a wave crashing over the crowd. Triplets? A woman whispered, her voice sharp with disbelief. Are they hers? Another asked. Or his, came the sharper reply. Maria followed behind them, her gown flowing like liquid midnight. The sequin shimmered with each step, catching the chandelier's glow. She moved with a calm that was almost regal, her chin lifted, her eyes forward. Every detail, the Rolls-Royce outside, the polished shoes of the children, the confidence in her stride spoke of a life that was far from the ruin Richard had promised. Richard's grip on his glass tightened until his knuckles whitened. The smirk he had worn so proudly cracked at the edges. No, he muttered under his breath, too soft for most to hear. This isn't possible. The triplets walked steadily, their small steps perfectly in sync, drawing every eye in the room. One boy clutched a tiny book, another a toy car, and the girl held a small bouquet of white roses. They weren't frightened by the stares. They seemed prepared for them. The murmurs thickened, buzzing through the ballroom like angry bees. Didn't Richard say she was broke? She doesn't look broke to me. Where did she get that car? And the children? Angela, still clutching her bouquet, stared at Maria with wide eyes. A pang of unease tightened her chest. She glanced at Richard, hoping for reassurance, but found only panic flickering behind his carefully controlled smile. Maria's eyes finally found his. There was no anger in her gaze, no desperation, only calm dignity, the kind that cuts deeper than rage. She didn't need to speak. Her presence spoke for her. Richard rose from his chair, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle. Well, you made it, he called out. his voice bouncing too loudly in the hushed room. "I wasn't sure you'd dare show your face." Some guests chuckled nervously, but most remained silent, their eyes darting between the ex-husband and ex-wife like spectators waiting for the first strike in a duel. Maria didn't rush to reply. She adjusted her clutch in her hand, glanced at her children, then looked back at Richard. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind of smile that said, "You have no idea what's coming." Angela's pulse quickened. She didn't know why, but she felt as though she were standing on the edge of a storm. Richard cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Please, everyone, don't stare. She came to wish us well, I'm sure. Isn't that right, Maria?" But Maria said nothing. Instead, she and the triplets walked slowly toward the front of the room, every step accompanied by a fresh ripple of whispers. The crowd parted like water, eyes widening. Drinks forgotten. The children stopped just short of the stage where Richard and Angela stood. The little girl with the bouquet lifted her head, her voice soft but clear. "Daddy, are you going to introduce us?" The room shattered into a storm of gasps. Glasses clinked against tables. Someone dropped a fork that rang sharp against the marble. The whispers turned into stunned exclamations. Angela staggered back a step, her face pale. Richard's forced smile froze. The champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Every eye in the room turned toward him, waiting for the truth he could no longer escape. The ballroom was no longer Richard's stage. Every gaze pinned him like spotlights, sharp and merciless. His forced grin wavered, the corners twitching as if stitched onto his face. The champagne glass shards sparkled at his feet, a broken reflection of his composure. The little girl still stood in front of him, bouquet clutched tightly, her voice hanging in the silence. "Daddy, are you going to introduce us?" Angela swayed, her knuckles white around her bouquet. "Richard, what does she mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling loud enough for nearby guests to catch. Richard forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "Children say the funniest things, don't they?" He looked down at the girl, bending slightly. "Sweetheart, I think you've made a mistake." But the child's steady gaze never wavered. "We don't make mistakes," she said softly. Her brothers nodded beside her, silent but firm. The whispers thickened into an audible storm. "Daddy? Did she say daddy? Are they his?" He never mentioned children. Maria, still calm, placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Her eyes lifted to Richard's, piercing, steady, unshaken. She hadn't spoken a word yet, and still, she controlled the room. Richard straightened, tugging at his tie as sweat began to glisten along his temple. His voice rose, trying to sound confident. "Everyone, relax. This is ridiculous. Just a misunderstanding. Maria must have coached them for attention." A collective murmur of disapproval rippled through the guests. Coaching children? At a wedding? Even those who once admired Richard shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Angela's lips parted, her breath sharp. "Richard, is it true?" Her words cracked, carrying across the hushed room. For the first time, Richard's smile fully faltered. His eyes darted between Angela, the guests, and Maria. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Maria finally stepped forward. The sequins of her gown shimmered as she moved, commanding without trying. Her voice, when it came, was calm but cutting. "No coaching, Richard. Just truth." Her words rang clear, sharp as crystal. The triplets tightened their small hands around hers, standing like a living wall at her side. Richard's face reddened. "You can't just waltz in here and what?" Maria interrupted, her tone steady, her volume soft but impossible to ignore. "And remind you of the life you abandoned? Or show these people the man behind the suit?" The crowd gasped, murmurs swelling again. Angela's face drained of color. Richard slammed his palm onto the table beside him, rattling silverware. "Enough! This is my wedding. You don't get to come in here and—" But his anger only cracked his mask further. Guests shifted uneasily, some shaking their heads, others whispering louder now. His arrogance, once admired, now looked pitiful. Maria didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, eyes never leaving his. Your wedding, yes. But dignity doesn't belong to you, Richard. It belongs to those who carry it. The words floated in the air like judgment. Even the orchestra, which had tried to quietly resume playing, fell silent again. Angela turned to Richard, her eyes filling with tears. You lied to me. Her voice trembled, but her words hit harder than any shout. Richard reached for her hand desperately, but she pulled back, clutching her bouquet to her chest as though it were armor. The room's energy shifted. Guests who once leaned toward Richard now leaned back, their eyes searching for Maria's reaction instead. Richard's smile, the charm that had carried him through years of arrogance, finally cracked completely. He stood exposed, trembling under the weight of truth, his voice dry, his hands unsteady. But Maria remained composed. Her calm presence was louder than his rage, her silence more powerful than his excuses. And then, with perfect timing, the eldest of the triplets pulled something from his pocket, a folded photograph. Worn at the edges, yet unmistakable. He held it up high, his voice small but clear. This is us. With him. Gasps filled the air, sharper than before. The image fluttered in the boy's hand like undeniable proof. Richard lunged forward, desperate to snatch the photo. But Maria's hand moved first, closing over it as her eyes locked on his with a quiet, unshakable fire. The photograph trembled between Maria's fingers, the edges worn but the image sharp. A younger Richard stared back from the glossy paper, his arm around Maria, the triplet smaller, chubbier but unmistakable, pressed against his chest. His smile in the picture was broad, proud, undeniable. The ballroom erupted. My God, it's him. He said he never had kids. All these years. The air buzzed with disbelief and betrayal. Guests leaned over their tables, some clutching their pearls, others pulling out their glasses to see more clearly. The sound of whispers swelled into waves, crashing against the walls of the golden ballroom. Angela staggered back another step, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Richard, what is this? Her voice broke, desperation spilling through every syllable. Richard lunged toward Maria, his hand outstretched, his charm gone, replaced by raw panic. Give me that. You don't get to parade lies around in front of my guests. Maria pulled the photograph closer to her chest, her calm like a shield. It isn't a lie. It's a memory. And you can't erase it, Richard. Not tonight. Not ever. The boy who had held the photo stood tall beside her, his little chin lifted. It's real. We were there. You were there. Richard's face darkened, his composure unraveling by the second. This is her game. Don't listen to her. He turned frantically toward the crowd. She's jealous, bitter, desperate to ruin what I've built. But the words landed flat. The photograph spoke louder than he ever could. Angela's chest heaved, her eyes darting between Richard and Maria, then to the children. You told me. You told me she left you because she didn't want a family, that she was selfish. Her voice cracked. But all this time, it was you? Richard reached for her, pleading. Angela, no, it's not what it looks like. She's manipulating you. Can't you see? Maria's voice rose, steady but sharp. The only manipulation here is your smile, Richard. You thought you could bury the truth under wealth and glitter. But truth doesn't die. It waits. The crowd hushed again, every eye glued to the woman who had barely spoken until now. A woman at the back whispered, She's stronger than him. A man replied, She doesn't even need to raise her voice. Richard's hands shook. His mask of confidence had cracked completely, leaving desperation behind. He turned on Maria, his words dripping venom. You think you can humiliate me? This is my wedding. You are nothing here. Maria met his rage with stillness. Her eyes glistened under the chandeliers, but not with tears, with quiet strength. If dignity is nothing, then I am nothing. But if truth is everything, then tonight I am everything you're not. Gasps rippled again. Some guests clapped lightly, instinctively, though quickly silenced themselves. Angela dropped her bouquet. the roses scattering across the marble like fallen pieces of her heart. She looked at Richard as though seeing him for the first time, not as the polished groom, but as the man behind the lies. "Richard," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Who are you?" His lips parted, but no words came. He was trapped, cornered not by Maria's anger, but by her calm. The ballroom seemed to close in on him, every chandelier, every polished surface reflecting his downfall. Maria lifted the photograph once more, holding it where all could see. Her voice carried, soft but unshakable. "This isn't about ruining your wedding, Richard. It's about remembering who you tried to erase." The triplets tightened their grip on her gown, their small faces lit with quiet pride. And then, just as Richard stepped forward again, a new sound broke the tension. The doors of the ballroom creaked open, and a tall figure in a dark suit entered, his steps deliberate, his presence commanding. Guests turned sharply, whispers cutting into silence once more. Richard's face drained of color as the man approached. The past was no longer just in photographs, it had walked through the door. The heavy doors groaned as they swung open, their golden handles catching the light. Every head turned. The band fell silent mid-note, leaving only the echo of the man's footsteps as he crossed the marble floor. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark tailored suit, he carried himself with the ease of someone who belonged anywhere he walked. His shoes clicked in steady rhythm, echoing against the chandelier's glow. Richard stiffened, color draining from his face. "No," he muttered under his breath, his voice breaking with recognition. Angela caught it. "You know him?" she asked sharply. The stranger didn't rush. He scanned the room calmly, his eyes moving from Richard to Maria, then down to the three children clutching her gown. A faint smile flickered across his lips, but it wasn't warm, it was knowing. Gasps broke out in the crowd as whispers spread like wildfire. Who is he? Does he belong to her? Or him? Why does Richard look terrified? Richard's charm had carried him through countless rooms, but tonight it failed him. He backed a step toward the stage, his hands twitching. "You don't belong here," he hissed, his voice low but audible to the nearest guests. The man paused just a few feet away, lifting his chin. His voice was calm, deep, and certain. "I belong exactly where the truth is, Richard." The crowd stirred again, a murmur rising. Angela's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She turned to Richard, her voice trembling. "What is going on? Who is he?" Richard barked, desperate. "Nobody, just a bitter face from the past." He turned toward the stranger, his composure cracking. "Leave, now, before I have you removed." The man didn't move. Instead, his eyes softened as they fell on the triplets. "You've grown," he said gently, as though he'd known them all their lives. The little girl tilted her head, her small voice curious. "You know us?" Maria rested a protective hand on her shoulder but didn't speak. Her silence was more powerful than any words. The man's gaze lifted back to Richard. They deserve to know who their father truly is. All of them. Not just these children, but every person in this room. Gasps echoed again. Guests leaned forward in their seats, their anticipation growing like fire. Angela's hand shook as she clutched her veil. "Father? Richard, what is he saying?" Richard's voice snapped like a whip. "Lies, that's all this is. A conspiracy, Maria. This is your doing. You brought him here." His voice cracked, sharp with fear. Maria finally spoke, her voice calm, her eyes locked on Richard. "No, Richard. You brought this on yourself. You built your kingdom on silence, on arrogance. Tonight, silence has ended." The stranger stepped closer, his presence looming, his voice steady. "You thought you could erase the past, Richard. But the past never leaves, it waits for nights like these." The room felt so quiet that even the flicker of candle flames could be heard. Every guest leaned forward, breathless, waiting. Angela looked at Richard with tears in her eyes, her voice breaking. "Tell me the truth, Richard, right now." Richard's lips trembled, his carefully crafted smile gone, his mask shattered. His hands hung at his sides, shaking. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. The stranger's eyes narrowed. "Shall I tell them for you?" The ballroom erupted again. voices overlapping. Tell us, what is he hiding? Who is the father? Richard's chest rose and fell rapidly, his arrogance collapsing into panic. He shook his head violently, sweat dripping down his temple. No, no one here needs to know. But Maria's calm voice cut through the noise. Then let me tell them. The ballroom was silent, so silent that the ticking of the massive grandfather clock in the corner became the only rhythm in the air. Dozens of eyes stayed fixed on Maria, waiting for her voice to carve through the thick fog of whispers and doubt. She stepped forward, her gown brushing softly against the marble. The triplets stayed close, their small hands clutching at her dress. Their faces steady, though the room felt like a storm. Her voice rose not loud, but sharp enough to pierce every corner of the hall. You all know Richard as the man of wealth, the man of charm, the man who built himself up as a symbol of success. But success built on lies is not success, it is theft. Gasps broke out. Guests leaned closer, straining to hear. Angela pressed her shaking hands against her chest, fighting for breath. Richard lunged a step toward Maria, his face red, his voice cracking. Don't listen to her. She's twisting everything. But Maria didn't flinch. She locked eyes with him, her voice calm and even more cutting because of it. Twisting? Or straightening what you've bent for years? The whispers swelled again. She sounds so sure. He never told us any of this. What else is he hiding? Maria lifted the photograph once more, holding it high. This is not a fabrication. This was our life. Richard was their father, my husband. But when the pressure came, when the responsibility grew heavy, he didn't stay. He walked away. Not just from me, but from them. The crowd gasped, louder now, the sound bouncing off the chandelier crystals. Angela's knees buckled, and she gripped the edge of the stage for support. You told me she was selfish. That she left you. Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her cheeks. But you left them? Richard's eyes darted wildly, his mask shattering further with each second. Angela, no. You don't understand. No. Angela's cry silenced the room. Her veil trembled as her hands clutched it. I don't understand. Because the man I thought I was marrying doesn't abandon children. He doesn't abandon truth. The crowd erupted again, some in disgust, others in disbelief. Conversations buzzed. He lied to all of us. And used this wedding to flaunt it? Disgraceful. Richard's desperation curdled into anger. He jabbed a finger at Maria. You think you're noble? You think showing up here makes you strong? You're nothing without me. You always were. But Maria didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her eyes shining not with tears, but with clarity. If I were nothing, Richard, then why does your world fall apart the moment I step into it? The words struck harder than any slap. The guests fell into a stunned hush, their faces a mix of awe and horror. The stranger in the dark suit moved closer now, his gaze locked on Richard. The truth is out. Everyone sees it. What will you hide behind now? Richard's lips trembled, his body shaking with rage. He looked to the crowd desperately, searching for an ally, a single sympathetic face. But all he found were cold eyes, whispers, and judgment. Angela's bouquet lay on the ground, roses scattered like shattered promises. She stared at Maria, then at the children, three small reflections of the man she thought she knew. Her voice, quiet but sharp, cut through the silence. The wedding is over. Richard's face contorted, panic twisting his features. No, you can't do this, not in front of them. But the room no longer belonged to him. Maria bent down slightly, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. Her voice was calm, steady, unshakable. You thought tonight would disgrace me, Richard. But the only disgrace here is yours. The chandeliers trembled slightly as if even the building recognized the weight of her words. And just as Richard opened his mouth to fire back, the stranger stepped forward. Pulling something from his jacket, something that would leave no room for denial. The stranger's footsteps echoed as he walked toward the center of the ballroom. Every head turned and every whisper died. He carried a slim black folder tucked beneath his arm, his presence calm but commanding. Richard's eyes narrowed. Who are you? You don't belong here. The man stopped under the chandelier's glow. He adjusted his jacket, then spoke, his tone clear and deliberate. "My name is David Reynolds. I'm a family attorney, and I've been holding something Richard hoped would never see the light of day." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard stiffened, his voice cracking. "This is ridiculous." "You're not." But David was already opening the folder. Inside were neatly stacked papers, crisp and official. He held one page high so all could see. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is a signed affidavit. Richard Hastings filed it years ago, denying financial responsibility for his 3 children, claiming they were not his." The ballroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, outrage like waves crashing into stone. Angela clutched the edge of a table, her face pale, her lips trembling. You swore to me they weren't yours." Maria's eyes closed briefly. The moment was heavy years of silence breaking, a truth she had carried alone finally given voice. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood, her dignity unshaken, letting the paper speak for itself. Richard lunged forward, snatching at the document. "This means nothing. It's old. It's irrelevant." His words stumbled, desperation bleeding through. David stepped back, his voice unwavering. "It means everything. Because you signed it, Richard. And now everyone knows what kind of man you really are." The guests murmured louder. He lied about his children? And abandoned them financially? All while building his wealth? The weight of judgment pressed in from every direction. Richard's confident smirk was gone, replaced with wild eyes searching for an escape. Angela shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. "You told me she was bitter, that she wanted to ruin you. But this is your own handwriting." She jabbed a trembling finger toward the paper, her voice breaking. "You lied to me. From the very start." Richard's voice faltered, his anger collapsing into raw panic. "Angela, please don't do this here. We can talk in private. This is just theater." But Angela stepped back, her veil slipping slightly as if even the fabric rejected the charade. "No, Richard. This was theater. Everything you built was a performance. And tonight, the curtain fell." The room crackled with energy. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some turning away, others leaning closer as though watching a man drown in slow motion. Maria finally spoke, her voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the tension. "You wanted me here to humiliate me, to remind me of what I lost. But what you lost, Richard, was your soul." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim under the weight of her words. The triplets, sensing the gravity of the moment, clutched Maria's hands tightly. One of them whispered, their voice small but steady, "Mama, can we go home?" Maria bent slightly, her eyes softening as she looked at her children. "Soon, my loves, soon." But before they could leave, Richard's voice rang out again, hoarse, frantic. "No, you can't just walk away. This is my wedding." David slid the folder shut, his tone final. "Not anymore." The crowd parted, their eyes following Maria as she gathered her children. Angela stood frozen, her bouquet still lying shattered on the floor. Richard looked around desperately, but no one moved to help him. His kingdom of pride had crumbled, leaving only dust and silence. And just as Maria reached the doorway, a voice from the back called out strong, familiar, and shocking enough to stop everyone in their tracks. "Richard Hastings owes me. 2. Richard Hastings owes me 2. The words sliced through the ballroom like a blade. Heads whipped toward the back of the hall. A man stepped forward, older, with rough hands and weary eyes. His suit was dated, his shoes worn, but his voice carried the authority of truth. "I worked for him. 15 years. Built his offices, painted his walls, fixed his floors. When it came time to pay me, he vanished. Left me with bills, left my family struggling. And now he stands here dressed in gold?" The man's voice cracked, thick with anger. "No more lies." The crowd stirred. Others murmured. One woman raised her hand, her bracelets jingling as she spoke. "He borrowed from me too. Promised he'd pay back within the month. That was 3 years ago." Gasps filled the air. The ballroom that once belonged to Richard was no longer his. It had turned into a courtroom, every guest a witness, every whisper a verdict. Richard's face drained of color. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the stage as if it could hold him upright. His voice came out in a broken stammer. No, this isn't real. You all, none of this matters. It's my wedding. Angela's veil slipped to the ground, her tears blurring her vision. She looked at him as though she were staring at a stranger. Richard, everything you told me was a lie. You lied about your ex-wife. You lied about her children. You lied about your business. Who even are you? He reached toward her, desperate. Angela, please, you can't leave me. You said you loved me. You said, but she pulled back, her voice trembling but firm. I love the man I thought you were. That man doesn't exist. The guests began to close in, their voices rising like waves. He owes me. He lied to me. He cheated us all. It was as though every hidden sin Richard had buried clawed its way up from the earth. Right there in front of him, Maria stood silent through it all, her triplets by her side. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth had become its own weapon. Her calm presence was louder than all the accusations. Richard tried to shout over them. Stop, you don't understand. I earned this. I deserve this life. His voice cracked, his once booming arrogance now reduced to trembling desperation. The stranger, David Reynolds, stepped forward again. You didn't earn anything, Richard. You stole, you lied, and you abandoned. And tonight, the world sees it. Richard's knees buckled. He sank onto the marble floor, clutching his head in his hands. His suit, once a symbol of power, now looked like a costume unraveling in the spotlight. Angela stepped away from him, toward Maria. Her voice was soft, broken. I'm so sorry. I believed him. I believed every word he said about you. I didn't know. Maria met her gaze. Her voice was gentle but steady. The truth has its own time. Tonight was its moment. The triplets looked at Angela, their eyes wide, uncertain. Angela, shaken, dropped to one knee before them. He doesn't deserve you. And I don't deserve to stand beside him. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But I hope one day you'll see not everyone is like him. The crowd pressed closer now, their murmurs a thunderous echo of condemnation. The walls of the ballroom seemed smaller, suffocating Richard under the weight of his exposed sins. He lifted his head, his face streaked with sweat and humiliation. Please. Someone. Anyone. Don't leave me like this. But no one moved. No hand reached out. The chandeliers above flickered, casting harsh shadows over his face. His empire, once towering, had collapsed in the span of an evening. Maria turned toward the exit, her children beside her. Every step she took was slow, deliberate, her silence louder than his screams. The guests parted for her, their eyes filled with respect. Richard's cries grew faint behind her. Maria, don't walk away from me. Don't you dare. But his voice broke, swallowed by the sound of whispers, by the weight of judgment, by the undeniable collapse of everything he had built on lies. As Maria reached the doors, the sound of a gavel striking echoed in the distance. David's final words ringing out, "This isn't just the end of a wedding. Tomorrow begins the end of Richard Hastings." The ballroom no longer looked like a celebration. The music had died. The flowers wilted under the weight of tension. The chandeliers cast a cold, merciless light on Richard, who still knelt on the marble floor, broken, his suit wrinkled, his face pale. Guests whispered in clusters, their voices low but sharp, like daggers thrown in secret. Some slipped out the doors, shaking their heads, unwilling to be associated with his ruin. Others lingered, watching, as if they had witnessed not a wedding but a trial. Maria stood at the doorway with her children, their small hands wrapped around her fingers. She paused, turning back one last time. Her eyes met Richard's. He looked up at her, his lips trembling, his voice hoarse. Maria, please, don't leave me like this. You know me. You know I didn't mean, but his words fell flat. They were no longer sharp blades. They were dust, scattered and powerless. Maria's voice was calm, steady. I knew you once. But the man I knew no longer exists. What's left of you is only shadows." The crowd stilled. Her words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of finality. Angela, her gown torn at the hem and her veil discarded, stood frozen near the stage. She had no tears left. She looked at Richard, then at Maria, her voice breaking. "Take your children and go. Leave this wreckage behind. It doesn't belong to you anymore." Maria gave a small nod. She bent down, smoothing the hair of her youngest child, and whispered, "It's over." The triplets clung to her as they stepped out into the night. Outside, the air was cool, the night sky vast and scattered with stars. The Rolls-Royce waited at the curb, gleaming under the street lamps. The chauffeur opened the door respectfully. Maria guided her children inside but lingered for a moment, looking back at the grand hall where her life had been torn apart years ago and now, where her dignity had been restored. Behind her, the muffled sound of chaos continued. Richard's voice, desperate, pleading with guests who no longer listened. The sound of papers rustling, of lawyers' voices, of promises broken. She turned away. The night belonged to her now. Back inside, Richard staggered to his feet. His hands shook as he reached for Angela, but she pulled away. "You ruined me," she whispered, her voice hollow. "And worse, you ruined yourself." She walked past him, disappearing into the crowd, her footsteps echoing like the last beat of a drum. The guests began to disperse. Some shook their heads. Others muttered words like fraud, coward, liar. Each word struck him like a stone. David Reynolds, the attorney, stepped closer, his tone sharp and final. "Richard Hastings, tomorrow morning you'll face more than humiliation. You'll face the law. I'll see to it." Richard's lips parted, but no words came. His voice was gone, drowned in the storm he created. Meanwhile, the Rolls-Royce glided through the city streets. Inside, Maria's children leaned against her, exhaustion finally catching them. Their small breaths rose and fell against her gown. Maria gazed out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. She wasn't thinking of revenge. She wasn't thinking of triumph. She was thinking of survival, of dignity, of how silence had been her greatest strength. Her mind drifted back to the words Richard once said to her, "You're nothing without me." Tonight proved the opposite. Without him, she was whole. With her children, she was everything. The car stopped at a modest house on a quiet street. It wasn't a mansion, but it was home. Warm lights glowed from inside. A neighbor waved kindly as she stepped out. The children ran up the steps, their laughter soft but real, breaking the heaviness of the night. Maria followed, her gown trailing behind her like the closing curtain of a play. She paused at the door, taking a deep breath. Then she entered, shutting the world of lies behind her. Back at the ballroom, Richard sat alone now. The guests were gone. The music never restarted. The flowers drooped, abandoned. The empire he built on arrogance lay in ruins. Not because someone shouted louder than him, but because someone stood taller in silence. His hands trembled as he looked around the empty hall, his voice barely a whisper. "I still had everything." But the echo that came back was cruel. In her quiet home, Maria tucked her children into bed. She kissed each forehead gently, their innocence untouched by the chaos of the night. As she closed their bedroom door, she whispered a single line, "We are free." She walked to the window, looking out at the night sky once more. The stars shone brighter now. And though she carried no crown, no wealth, no grand hall, she carried something Richard could never buy. Respect, dignity, truth, the kind of justice that doesn't roar in anger, but whispers in peace. And tonight, that whisper echoed louder than Richard Hastings' empire ever had. Far across the city, Richard sat in darkness, staring at nothing. While in the quiet of her home, Maria smiled softly at her sleeping children, the true inheritance of a life lived with dignity,